Part 3 of the Mabinogion. The story of Manawydan. Prince Manawydan felt sad and lonely. He'd come to London to bury the head of his brother, Mabinogion, beneath the White Hill. Now he was wandering the streets of the city with Pryderi, the Prince of Dyfed. "I don't know what to do," sighed Manawydan. "I have no home, nor family. My brother is dead, and another man rules the island of the mighty. I've nowhere to go." "You poor thing," Pryderi said, feeling sorry for his friend. Pryderi had his very own court in Arbeth, and a wife and a mother to keep him company. "Manawydan," he said, "you must come home with me." "You're very kind," said Manawydan with a shake of his head, "but I can't live in someone else's home." "I know that," said Pryderi, "but my father has died, so if you marry my mother, Rhiannon, my home will be also your home." Manawydan looked at him in astonishment. Who but Pryderi would make such an offer? Pryderi was the son of the Prince Pwll, and just as headstrong as his father when he was young. "I'm serious," Pryderi insisted. "Come with me and meet my mother. If you two decide to marry, I'll let you rule Dyfed on my behalf, and then you'll have a land, a home, and a family." A land, a home, and a family. How could Manawydan refuse? That afternoon he left London and rode westward with Pryderi. The two men travelled for a month until they reached a land of green meadows and busy little cottages. Snow-white sheep speckled the hillside, and silvery fish darted in the clear water of the streams. "What do you think of this land, Manawydan?" asked Pryderi. "Would you say it was beautiful?" "Very beautiful," replied Manawydan. "Well, this is Dyfed," said Pryderi proudly. The two rode on to the court at Arbeth. Cigva, Pryderi's wife, came out to greet them, followed by his mother, Rhiannon, her fair hair glowing in the sunlight. "What do you think of this fair-haired lady?" whispered Pryderi. "Is she pretty?" "Very pretty," replied Manawydan, blushing to the roots of his hair. "Well, that's my mother," said Pryderi, with a grin. "Come on, let's go into the hall." A mouth-watering feast had been laid out in the hall. Manawydan sat at the table next to Rhiannon, and soon they were deep in conversation. Rhiannon was a delightful companion. She and Manawydan got on so well that by the end of the meal they'd agreed to marry. "Well," said Pryderi to Manawydan, "are you glad you came with me to Dyfed?" "Dyfed is the best place in the world," replied Manawydan with a grateful smile. Within a few days, Manawydan's life had changed completely. He had a dear wife, good friends, and a beautiful land which was his to rule. One afternoon, after feasting in the court at Arbeth, Manawydan, Rhiannon, Cigva, and Pryderi went for a walk to the top of a nearby hill. This hill was known as the Throne of Arbeth. It was a fine day. Below them sheep and cattle lazed in the shade of the trees. Cheerful voices echoed from the fields. The door of each cottage was open, and curls of smoke melted into the blue sky. "I'm so lucky to be living in this wonderful land," said Manawydan. "I'm so lucky to have friends. Let's all sit down and enjoy the scenery." No sooner had the four friends sat on the hill than a thunderclap rent the air, and a thick mist descended. And when the skies cleared, Rhiannon's face was as pale as the mist itself. "Look, Manawydan," she cried. "Look what's happened." Manawydan looked around him and couldn't believe his eyes. Where was the beautiful land of Dyfed? Every cottage and every person had disappeared with the mist. The sheep and the cattle had vanished. The fields were drained of colour, and the only building still standing was the court at Arbeth. "Let's go back to the court to get help," called Manawydan to his friends. "Hurry! Hurry!" The four ran down the hill and rushed to the court, shouting for their servants as they went. But no one answered. The court was silent. The fires had died, and the buildings stood empty. "Where is everyone?" said Manawydan. "They must be somewhere." The four friends searched the area around the court. They searched far and wide. For a whole year they searched through every corner of Dyfed. During that time they saw no living person, nor cattle, nor sheep. They were the only four people left in the land. Everyone else had vanished with the mist. When the year was over, the four friends returned to the court at Arbeth, and carried on with their lives as best they could. Every day Manawydan and Pryderi went out to fish, catch rabbits, and search in the wood for the honey of the wild bees. One day, when they were out hunting with their hounds near the throne of Arbeth, they heard a loud rustling in a bush. "There must be a huge rabbit in there," said Pryderi excitedly. "After it, hounds, after it!" The hounds ran towards the bush, but backed away just as fast. A huge white head had appeared among the leaves. On the head were 2 gleaming tusks. "A wild boar!" cried Manawydan. He hadn't seen a wild boar since the mist descended. The wild boar pushed its way out of the bush and stood boldly in front of the hounds. "Come on, hounds!" yelled Pryderi. "Kill it!" But the hounds' tails drooped, and they whined and looked uneasy. The boar was standing its ground. They were the ones who were afraid. With grunts of annoyance, Manawydan and Pryderi got down from their saddle. At once the boar turned tail and ran off past the throne of Arbeth, followed by the men and their hounds. It ran and ran till it came to the shimmering castle where no castle had ever stood before. The 2 princes stopped, open-mouthed. Who had built the castle? Where had it come from? While they were still lost in wonder, the boar ran inside, closely followed by the hounds. Manawydan and Pryderi retreated to the throne of Arbeth. From the top of the hill they kept watch on the strange castle. Though the door was open, no sound could be heard, no grunting, nor barking, nor the sound of human voices. "Manawydan," said Pryderi at last, "we can't hunt without hounds. I've got to go and find them." "No, don't," begged Manawydan. "The castle has come from nowhere. It's a magic castle. Don't go near it." But Pryderi was determined. Boldly he strode towards the castle and stepped inside. Ahead of him stretched a long, empty corridor. The prince walked along the corridor till he came to a courtyard with a marble fountain at its centre. Above the fountain hung an ornate golden bowl, suspended on 4 long chains that disappeared into the clouds. It was such a wonderful bowl that Pryderi just had to touch it. As soon as he did so, his hands stuck to the gold, and his feet stuck to the marble floor. He opened his mouth to shout for help, but his voice had gone. In the meantime, Manawydan was still waiting on the throne of Arbeth. When it grew dark, he returned to the court. "Where is Pryderi?" asked Rhiannon. "He insisted on going to the magic castle, although I told him not to," said Manawydan. "I haven't seen him since." "What, you've left my son in a magic castle?" cried Rhiannon. She rushed out of the court and across the field, followed by Manawydan. Without thought of danger, she ran into the castle and along the corridor till she saw her son with a bowl in his hands. "Pryderi, what on earth are you doing?" she cried. She tugged at his hands, but the moment she touched them, she too became a prisoner of the golden bowl. "Rhiannon!" wailed Manawydan. Before he could reach the castle, a loud thunderclap had rent the air, and a mist descended once more on Dyfed. When the mist lifted, the castle had disappeared, taking Pryderi and Rhiannon with it. Manawydan hurried home to tell Cigfa the dreadful news. "What shall we do?" wept Cigfa. "What can we do?" sighed Manawydan. "You and I must take care of Dyfed and hope for the best." Life was harder than ever for Manawydan. Without his hounds, he couldn't go hunting for food. "We must go to England to buy seeds," he said to Cigfa. "If we grow crops, at least we'll have something to eat." So Manawydan and Cigfa set off for England and bought enough seeds to sow 3 fields. As soon as they returned to Arbeth, Manawydan planted the seeds, watered them, tended them carefully. By the time autumn came, there were 3 crops of golden corn in the grey land of Dyfed. "The first field is ready to harvest," said Manawydan to Cigfa one evening. "I'll start on it tomorrow." The next day Manawydan rose at dawn and set off with a spring in his step. When he came within sight of the field, he cried out in dismay. The field was a mess of broken stalks. Every single ear of corn had disappeared. Manawydan ran to the second field as fast as his legs could carry him. The corn in the second field stood yellow and upright, with plump ears that rattled and swayed in the breeze. "Thank goodness," said Manawydan, wiping the sweat from his brow. "I don't know what happened to that first field, but this one is as good as ever it was. It'll be ready to harvest tomorrow." The next morning Manawydan rose with a lark and set off for the second field. But when he came within sight of the field, he cried out in dismay. Where was the rich yellow corn? During the night the stalks had been stripped bare. Manawydan hunched his shoulders and looked around him at the grey hills. Someone was trying to destroy him. Who could it be? There was no one in sight. He went back to Kikva. I have one field left, he told her. I won't let anyone destroy that field. I'm going to stand guard all night. As soon as night fell, Manawydan crept towards the third field and hid in a bush. By the light of the moon he kept watch on his crop and listened intently. At midnight he heard the rushing of wind and saw the corn bend and shake. A huge army of mice had run into the field. They were climbing up the stalks and tearing at the leaves of corn with their sharp little teeth. "Stop, thieves!" yelled Manawydan, running towards them with his hands outstretched. "I'll get you now!" But the mice were small and nimble. They slipped through Manawydan's fingers one after another, and soon the only one left was a plump little mouse that couldn't move fast. With a snarl at Manawydan, snatched her up, put her in his glove, and hurried back to the court. "What have you caught?" said Kikva when she saw the wriggling glove. "A thief," said Manawydan. Kikva peeped inside. "But it's only a little mouse," she said. "A little mouse, but a big thief," replied Manawydan, "and she must pay for her thieving. I'll hang her tomorrow morning." The next morning Manawydan took the mouse, to the throne of Arbeth. On the top of the hill he planted 2 forked sticks. He was looking for another stick to lay across the top when he saw a man on the path below. Manawydan stopped in astonishment. It was years since he'd seen a stranger in Dyfed. "Who are you?" he called. "And where have you come from?" "I'm a poor monk who's on his way home from England," the man replied. "What are you doing, may I ask?" "I'm going to hang a thief," replied Manawydan. "A thief?" said the monk. "I can only see a mouse. Surely you're not going to hang a mouse?" "Yes, I am," snapped Manawydan. "I'm building a gallows." "Oh, an important person like you shouldn't be wasting his time on such a miserable creature," said the monk, rummaging in the pocket of his tattered cloak. "I've been begging in England and have a whole £1 in my pocket. Will you sell me the mouse for £1? "Certainly not," said Manawydan. "In that case, good day to you," said the monk, and he went on his way. Manawydan went back to his work. He just put the last stick in place when he saw a man riding towards him. This man was also wearing a cloak, but it was a rich cloak with no holes in it. "Good day to you, friend," called the man. "Good day to you too," said Manawydan. "Who are you?" "I'm a priest of the church," the man replied with a toothy smile. "I see you're busy, friend. What are you doing?" "I'm going to hang a thief," said Manawydan. "A thief?" gasped the priest. "What sort of a thief can possibly hang on that tiny gallows?" "A thief in the shape of a mouse," replied Manawydan. "Oh, an important man like you shouldn't be wasting his time on such a miserable creature. Sell it to me for £3. "Certainly not," snapped Manawydan. "She's a thief and must be punished like every other thief." "In that case, good day to you," said the priest. Manawydan had just placed a cord round the mouse's neck when he saw yet another man riding towards him. This man was a bishop, a very important churchman. He was dressed like a prince and had many servants in attendance. Said Manawydan when he saw the bishop getting down from his saddle. "Someone else is going to try and save you, little thief. I wonder why you're so important." The bishop clambered to the top of the hill. "Good day to you," he said, Manawydan. "What are you doing?" "I'm hanging a thief," replied the prince. "But you've got a mouse in your hand," said the bishop. "A mouse who's also a thief," said Manawydan. "Oh," said the bishop. "An important man like you shouldn't be wasting his time on such a miserable creature. Look, here are £7. If you set the creature free, the money's yours." "No thanks," said Manawydan firmly. "How about £24? Suggested the bishop. "Will you set the mouse free for £24? "Certainly not," said Manawydan. "Then name your price," said the bishop. Manawydan eyed the bishop closely. Who would offer such a price for a small mouse? Who was the mouse? "Name your price," repeated the bishop. "I've lost my wife Rhiannon and my friend Pryderi," Manawydan replied cunningly. "I want them back. That's my price." "You shall have what you asked for," said the bishop, reaching for the mouse. Manawydan hid the little creature in his fist. "A spell has been cast on Dyfed," he continued. "I want you to remove that too." "I'll do that," said the bishop, "as long as you set the mouse free." "One more thing," said Manawydan, who was beginning to enjoy himself. "Tell me who the mouse is." The bishop's voice trembled. "She's my wife," he said. "Your wife?" Manawydan burst out laughing. "Why did you send your wife to destroy my corn?" "My name is Llwyd, "Son of Kilcoyd," the bishop said sulkily. "Years ago, Pryderi's parents, Pwll and Rhiannon, played a trick on my friend, Gwawl, the son of Clwyd. Gwawl wanted to marry Rhiannon, but Pwll tied him up in a sack and made a fool of him. I cast a spell on David to pay them back." "What about the mice?" said Manawydan. "Where did they come from?" "When my soldiers heard about your crops, they begged me to change them into mice. They were the ones who destroyed your corn on the first 2 nights. Then on the 3rd night, my wife and the ladies of the court asked if they could have their turn. My wife is expecting a baby and can't move very quickly. If it wasn't for that, you'd never have caught her." At the sound of her husband's voice, the mouse poked her head out of Manawydan's fist. Before Llwyd could catch hold of her, Manawydan hid her behind his back. "Not so fast," he said. "I haven't finished yet." "What else do you want?" growled Llwyd. "I want you to promise that you'll never cast another spell on David," said Manawydan. "I promise," said Llwyd. "Now, for goodness sake, set my wife free." Manawydan shook his head. "No," he said. "I also want you to promise never to take revenge on myself, Pryderi, or Rhiannon." "Just as well you said that," sneered Llwyd. "I was planning to play all sorts of tricks on you." "I'm sure you were," said Manawydan. "But do you promise?" "Yes," snapped Llwyd. "Now give me my wife back." "First let me see Pryderi and Rhiannon," said Manawydan. Llwyd sniffed and stepped to one side. On the hill behind him stood Rhiannon and Pryderi. Manawydan rushed towards them and hugged them so tightly that the mouse squealed. "Now you can go back to your husband," said Manawydan. The mouse jumped from his hand and ran across the grass to her husband. At the wave of Llwyd's magic wand she turned into a beautiful young woman. The countryside around her became green and lush once more. Smoke curled from cottage doorways, and sheep and cattle grazed in the fields. Manawydan, Pryderi, Rhiannon hurried down the green hill towards Arbeth. In the court Cigva was waiting for them. Fires were burning in the hearths. The cooks were busy preparing a feast, and servants were carrying dish after dish to the great hall. Manawydan put his arm round his wife and turned to his friends with a beaming smile. "David is the best place in the whole wide world," he said proudly. "That mist will never bother us again." And so the 4 friends sat down to celebrate in the beautiful land of David, where the sun was shining.